The day David Chen walked through the doors of Riverside Medical Center as the new hospital director, everyone knew things were about to change. And not in a good way. Rebecca Williams had been a nurse in the intensive care unit for 15 years. She'd seen directors come and go, but something about this one felt different. The rumors had started weeks before he even arrived. People said he'd turned 3 hospitals around by cutting costs and improving efficiency. But when Rebecca asked what that actually meant, nobody wanted to give her a straight answer. His first day was a Monday. Rebecca was finishing up her morning rounds when she heard the commotion in the hallway. David was doing a walkthrough with the board members, and you could hear his voice carrying down the corridor, not because he was yelling, but because he had that kind of voice, the kind that demanded attention, the kind that made you stand a little straighter even when you didn't want to. "This floor is overstaffed," she heard him say as the group passed by the ICU nurses station. "We can operate with 20% fewer nurses and redirect those funds to equipment." Rebecca's colleague, an older nurse named Patricia, looked up from her charts. Her face went pale. They both knew what that meant. Riverside wasn't overstaffed. They were barely keeping their heads above water as it was. By lunch, everyone in the hospital was talking about the new director. He'd spent the morning going through every department with a clipboard and a calculator. He'd questioned supply orders, staff schedules, and patient care protocols. He'd used words like optimization and streamlining so many times that people started making a game out of counting them. But it wasn't what he said that bothered Rebecca. It was how he said it, like the hospital was just a business, like patients were numbers on a spreadsheet, like nurses were interchangeable parts in a machine. The first week got worse. David started holding mandatory meetings every morning at 7. That meant nurses coming off night shifts had to stay late, and nurses starting day shifts had to come in early. Nobody got paid for that extra time. When someone asked about compensation, David just smiled and said, "We're all here for the patients, aren't we? This isn't about money." Easy for him to say, Rebecca thought. He was making 3 times what she made, and he didn't have to work 12-hour shifts standing on his feet. Then came the new policies. Supply orders had to be approved by administration before anyone could order anything. That meant if they ran low on something critical, they had to wait for David's office to process the request. Rebecca had to fight for 3 days just to get basic wound care supplies restocked. 3 days. "These supplies are expensive," David told her when she finally cornered him in his office. "We need to make sure we're using them appropriately." "We are using them appropriately," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We use them on patients who need them." David looked at her over the top of his reading glasses. "I'm sure you think you do, but the numbers show we're going through supplies faster than comparable hospitals. That suggests waste. Or it suggests we actually take care of our patients," Rebecca shot back. The look he gave her then made her blood run cold. It wasn't anger exactly. It was dismissal. Like she was a child who didn't understand how the adult world worked. "Miss Williams," he said, not even getting her title right. "You're a nurse. An excellent nurse, I'm sure. But hospital management is more complex than you realize. Leave these decisions to people who understand the bigger picture." Rebecca left his office shaking, not with fear but with frustration. She'd spent 15 years in that ICU. She'd held the hands of dying patients. She'd saved lives. She'd done more for that hospital than David Chen would ever do sitting in his comfortable office making his spreadsheets balance. But the worst part was watching what it did to everyone else. The younger nurses started questioning themselves. When they asked for supplies or support, they'd apologize first. "I'm sorry to bother you, but..." Patricia, who'd been nursing for 30 years, stopped speaking up in meetings altogether. The doctors noticed too, but most of them just shrugged. They had their own battles to fight with the new director. By the end of the first month, morale was in the basement. 2 experienced nurses quit. One of the best respiratory therapists transferred to a different hospital. The cafeteria staff stopped making eye contact with anyone from administration. It was like a dark cloud had settled over Riverside Medical Center, and nobody knew how to make it go away. David, meanwhile, seemed pleased with himself. He'd cut the budget by 18%. He'd optimized staffing levels. He'd renegotiated supplier contracts. At the board meeting, he presented charts and graphs showing improved efficiency. The board members nodded approvingly. The numbers looked good on paper, but numbers don't show everything. They don't show how tired the nurses are when they're covering 2 extra patients each. They don't show how many times someone has to improvise because supplies haven't been approved yet. They don't show the little moments of care that get skipped because there simply isn't time anymore. Rebecca tried to focus on her patients. That's what she'd always done. The politics and the budgets and the hospital drama, all of that was noise. What mattered was the person in the bed, scared and hurting and depending on her to help them through the worst day of their life. But it was getting harder. Every day something new would happen that made her job more difficult. A policy that didn't make sense. A restriction that put patients at risk. A comment from David that made her feel small and insignificant. The breaking point was coming. Rebecca could feel it. Something was going to happen that would force everything out into the open. She just didn't know what it would be yet. What she did know was that she was tired of watching a hospital she loved being run into the ground by someone who saw patients as profit margins and nurses as expenses to be minimized. She was tired of being talked down to by someone who'd never spent a single minute actually caring for a sick person. 15 years she'd given to this place. 15 years of holidays missed, family dinners skipped, sleep lost, and emotional exhaustion. She'd earned the right to speak up. She'd earned the right to be heard. And sooner or later, David Chen was going to learn that, nurse or not. Rebecca Williams wasn't someone who could be pushed around. The question was just how that lesson was going to get taught. And when Rebecca found out the truth about David, she realized the answer would come sooner than anyone expected. It was a Thursday evening when everything changed. Rebecca was working the late shift, which she actually preferred sometimes. The hospital got quieter after visiting hours ended. The overhead lights were dimmed. There was something peaceful about it. Despite the constant beeping of monitors and the occasional emergency, she was updating patient charts at the nurses' station when she heard the elevator doors open down the hall. Footsteps echoed on the linoleum floor. Quick, purposeful footsteps. She looked up and her stomach dropped. David Chen was walking toward the ICU, alone, at 9:30 at night. That wasn't normal. Directors didn't just show up in patient care areas this late unless there was an emergency. And if there was an emergency, someone would have called her. Rebecca stood up, her instincts telling her something was wrong. "Good evening, Miss Williams," David said as he approached. He wasn't wearing his usual suit jacket, just a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked stressed, which was unusual for him. The man was normally composed to the point of being robotic. "It's Mrs. Williams, actually," Rebecca corrected him for probably the 10th time. "Can I help you with something?" "I need to see a patient. Room 412. Rebecca's mind immediately went to the patient in that room. A woman who'd been admitted 3 days ago. Psychiatric hold. Attempted overdose. Rebecca had been one of her primary nurses, and she remembered very clearly that this patient had special restrictions on her chart. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said carefully. "That patient isn't taking visitors right now." "I'm not a visitor," David said, his voice taking on that edge she'd heard him use with other staff members. "I'm the hospital director. I have authority to access any patient room in this facility." "Actually, you don't," Rebecca said, keeping her voice calm and professional. "Patient 412 has restricted access. Only approved medical staff can enter that room, and visitors require specific authorization." David's jaw tightened. "I'm aware of hospital protocols, Mrs. Williams, but there are circumstances that require administrative oversight. Now, if you'll excuse me." He tried to step around her. Rebecca moved to block his path. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her face neutral. 15 years as an ICU nurse had taught her how to stay calm under pressure. "I can't let you do that," she said firmly. "You can't let me?" David's voice rose slightly. "Do you understand who you're talking to?" "I understand perfectly," Rebecca said. "You're the hospital director, but I'm the charge nurse on this floor, and it's my responsibility to protect my patients. That includes protecting them from unauthorized access, regardless of who's requesting it." A couple of other nurses had noticed what was happening. Patricia had stepped out of a patient room and was watching nervously. Tom, one of the night shift nurses, had paused in the middle of his rounds. David leaned in closer. "Let me explain something to you. That patient in room 412, I have personal reasons for needing to check on her welfare. This is not a power play. This is not about hospital politics. I need to see her now." "Personal reasons?" Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. Why would the hospital director have personal reasons to see a patient on a psychiatric hold? She pulled up the patient's chart on her tablet, scrolling quickly to the restrictions section. And there it was. A note she'd seen before but hadn't connected to anything. No contact with David Chen. Court-ordered restraining order on file. Everything suddenly made sense. The late-night visit. The stress in his voice. The insistence on seeing this particular patient. This wasn't about hospital business at all. "Sir," Rebecca said quietly, "I'm going to need you to leave the ICU." "Excuse me? You're on the restricted visitor list for this patient. There's a court order. I legally cannot allow you near her room." David's face went white, then red. "That's none of your business. Those records are confidential." "They're confidential from you," Rebecca said. "They're not confidential from her medical team. And right now I'm protecting my patient's legal rights and safety." "You have no idea what you're talking about," David said through gritted teeth. "You're making assumptions based on incomplete information." "Then help me understand," Rebecca said. "Why is there a restraining order with your name on it?" David didn't answer. Instead, he tried to push past her again. This time, Rebecca put her hand up. "Sir, stop. Get out of my way." "No." They stood there for a moment, locked in a standoff. Patricia had already picked up the phone at the nurse's station. Tom had moved closer, ready to back Rebecca up if needed. "I could have you fired for this," David said quietly. "Do you understand that? By tomorrow morning, you could be out of a job." "Maybe," Rebecca said, "but my patient will be safe. And honestly, that's all that matters to me." Something flickered across David's face. Anger, maybe, or desperation. He looked at room 412, then back at Rebecca. For a second, she thought he might actually try to physically move her out of the way. "Security is on their way," Patricia called out. David's expression hardened. "You're making a huge mistake." "I don't think I am," Rebecca said. The security guards arrived within 2 minutes. 2 large men in uniform who'd worked at Riverside for years. They knew Rebecca. They'd never met David Chen outside of his official capacity. "What seems to be the problem?" the older guard asked. Rebecca explained the situation calmly and professionally. David tried to interrupt several times, but she kept talking. The patient in room 412 had a restraining order. The hospital director's name was on the restricted list. He was attempting to gain unauthorized access. She was following hospital protocol by denying him entry. The guards looked uncomfortable. You could see them mentally calculating the politics of the situation. This was the hospital director. Their boss's boss's boss. But it was also a court order. And a nurse who was clearly following the rules. "Sir," the older guard said carefully, "I think it would be best if you left the floor for now. We can sort this out in the morning with administration." "I am administration," David snapped. "I understand, sir, but the nurse is correct. If there's a restraining order, we can't let you near that patient's room. It's the law." For a moment, Rebecca thought David was going to argue, but then something in him seemed to deflate. He straightened his shoulders, smoothed down his shirt, and fixed Rebecca with a look that could freeze water. "This isn't over," he said coldly. "Not even close." "I expect it isn't," Rebecca replied. The security guards escorted David to the elevator. The entire floor seemed to be holding its breath. Once the elevator doors closed, everyone started talking at once. Patricia rushed over. "Oh my God, Rebecca. Do you know what you just did?" "Yeah," Rebecca said, her hands starting to shake now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "I protected my patient." "He's going to fire you," Tom said. "First thing tomorrow." "Probably," Rebecca agreed. She looked at room 412. The patient inside had no idea what had just happened. She was sleeping peacefully, finally getting the rest she desperately needed. Safe. Protected. Rebecca had been a nurse long enough to know that sometimes doing the right thing came with consequences. But she also knew that if she'd let David into that room, knowing about the restraining order, she would have been betraying everything she believed in. So she sat back down at the nurse's station and finished her charts. Whatever tomorrow brought, she'd deal with it then. Tonight she'd done her job, and that would have to be enough. Rebecca didn't sleep that night. She got home at 7 in the morning after her shift ended, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw David's face, that cold, angry expression. The way he'd said, "This isn't over." She knew what was coming. The call came at 8:30. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand and she picked it up with trembling hands. "Mrs. Williams, this is Helen from Human Resources. We need you to come in for a meeting this morning at 10 o'clock. It's urgent. "What's this about?" Rebecca asked, even though she already knew. "The hospital board has called an emergency meeting. Your presence is required." Rebecca sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. So this was it. David was going to fire her, and he'd gotten the board involved to make it official. She'd worked at Riverside for 15 years. 15 years of perfect evaluations, commendations, and going above and beyond. And it was all going to end because she'd done her job. She should have felt scared. Instead, she just felt tired. By the time Rebecca showered and got dressed, her phone was blowing up. Text messages from other nurses. Calls from people who'd heard what happened. The night shift had talked. Word had spread through the hospital like wildfire. Patricia had texted, "Everyone knows what you did. You're a hero." Rebecca didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who was about to lose everything. When she walked into the hospital at 9:45, something strange was happening. People were staring at her, but not in a bad way. Nurses nodded as she passed. A respiratory therapist gave her a thumbs up. One of the janitors actually stopped mopping to shake her hand. "You did the right thing," he said simply. Rebecca made her way to the administrative wing, her heart pounding. Outside the boardroom, she found something she didn't expect. About 20 people were gathered there. Nurses mostly, but also a few doctors, some lab technicians, even someone from billing. "What's going on?" Rebecca asked. Tom from the night shift stepped forward. He was holding a stack of papers. "We made a petition. Supporting you. Explaining what happened. We've got almost 300 signatures already, and we only started collecting them an hour ago." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "You guys didn't have to do this." "Yes, we did," Patricia said, appearing from the group. Someone finally stood up to him. Someone finally said enough. "We're not letting you go down alone." Before Rebecca could respond, the boardroom door opened. Helen from HR appeared, looking stressed and uncomfortable. "Mrs. Williams, we're ready for you." Rebecca walked into the room and her stomach dropped. The entire hospital board was there. 8 people sitting along one side of a massive conference table. David was there too, sitting at the far end, looking calm and composed. Like he hadn't tried to violate a restraining order less than 12 hours ago. "Please sit down," said the board chairman, an older man named Mr. Richardson. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired. Rebecca sat, her hands clasped in her lap. She'd prepared a whole speech in her head about patient rights and legal obligations and how she was just following protocol. But before she could say anything, Mr. Richardson spoke. "Mrs. Williams, we've heard Director Chen's version of last night's events. Now we'd like to hear yours." So Rebecca told them everything. How David had shown up late at night, how he'd demanded access to a patient's room, how she'd checked the chart and seen the restraining order, how he'd tried to push past her anyway. She kept her voice steady and professional, sticking to the facts. When she finished, there was silence. David was staring at the table, his jaw clenched. "Is there anything else we should know?" asked one of the board members, a woman Rebecca recognized but couldn't name. "Yes," Rebecca said. "After I got home this morning, I couldn't stop thinking about why Director Chen would risk his career to see that patient. So I did some research." She pulled out her phone and opened her notes. "Director Chen has accessed that patient's medical records 17 times since she was admitted. Not for legitimate medical oversight. Just accessed them. Looked at her vitals, her medication list, her psych evaluations. That's a HIPAA violation, a serious one." David's head snapped up. "That's a lie." "It's not," Rebecca said calmly. "Every time anyone accesses a patient's electronic medical record, it creates a log. I asked IT to pull the access records this morning. They're public record for compliance purposes." She'd expected David to explode, to shout or threaten or do something. Instead, he went very quiet. Very still, Mr. Richardson looked at David. "Is this true?" "I can explain," David said. "I'm sure you can," Mr. Richardson said coldly. "But not right now." The door opened again and 2 people Rebecca didn't recognize walked in. "A man in a suit and a woman carrying a briefcase, Mr. Richardson," the man said. "We're attorneys from Carson and Associates. We represent the patient in room 412. We were contacted this morning by several hospital staff members who were concerned about potential violations of our client's restraining order and privacy rights." Rebecca's mouth fell open. "Someone had called lawyers? We've also been contacted by Channel 7 News," the woman added. They're running a story tonight about a nurse who protected a domestic violence victim from her abuser. An abuser who happens to be the hospital director of the facility where she's being treated. The board members started talking all at once. David had gone pale. Mr. Richardson held up his hand for silence. "Before we go any further," he said heavily, "I think we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. Director Chen, what is your relationship to the patient in room 4912? David didn't answer right away. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and thick. Finally, he said, "She's my ex-wife." The room erupted. Board members demanding explanations. The lawyers taking notes. Helen from HR looking like she wanted to disappear through the floor. "And the restraining order?" Mr. Richardson asked. "It's complicated," David said. "No, it's not," one of the lawyers said. "Your ex-wife has a valid protection order against you. She's admitted to this hospital after a mental health crisis. You've been accessing her medical records without authorization and attempted to gain physical access to her room. This is stalking. This is harassment. This is illegal." "I was worried about her," David said, and for the first time Rebecca heard something real in his voice, something human. "I just wanted to make sure she was okay." "You have a restraining order," the lawyer said bluntly. "You're not allowed to check on her. You're not allowed to know where she is. You're not allowed to access information about her. The court was very clear about this." Mr. Richardson looked at Rebecca. "Did you know about the restraining order before last night?" "No, sir," Rebecca said. "I saw her name on the restricted visitor list when she was admitted, but I didn't connect it to Director Chen until he showed up trying to see her. That's when I checked the chart and saw the details." "And you prevented him from entering her room?" "Yes, sir. It's my job to protect my patients. All of them. From everyone, even administrators." One of the board members, a younger man, spoke up. "Has Director Chen retaliated against you or threatened you?" Rebecca thought about David's parting words. This isn't over. But before she could answer, her phone buzzed. Then Patricia's phone. Then several other phones in the building from the sound of it. Tom burst into the boardroom holding up his phone. "Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." He turned his phone around. It was a news website. The headline read, "Hospital Director Attempts to Access Domestic Violence Victim's Room. Nurse Blocks Him." Below it was a photo of David being escorted out by security. Someone had leaked the story, and now it was everywhere. Mr. Richardson closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he looked at David. "Director Chen, you're suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. Security will escort you out." David stood up slowly. He looked at Rebecca and she couldn't read his expression. Anger, shame, regret? "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said quietly. Then he was gone, and Rebecca was left sitting in a boardroom full of strangers, wondering how her life had gotten so complicated in less than 24 hours. The investigation took 3 days. 3 long, exhausting days where Rebecca felt like her entire life was under a microscope. The hospital brought in outside investigators, people in suits who interviewed everyone who'd been working that night. They pulled security footage. They analyzed computer logs. They went through every single time David had accessed his ex-wife's medical records, and the pattern they found was disturbing. He'd looked at her file within an hour of her being admitted. Then again at 2 in the morning. Then 3 more times the next day. He'd checked which medications she was on, which doctors were treating her, what her diagnosis was. He'd even looked up which room she was in and what the visiting restrictions were. It's like he was obsessing over her, one of the investigators told Mr. Richardson during a briefing Rebecca happened to overhear. Classic stalking behavior. He knew he couldn't contact her directly because of the restraining order, so he found another way to keep tabs on her. What really got to Rebecca was what they discovered next. David had been manipulating things behind the scenes. He'd tried to get the patient moved to a different floor. When that didn't work, he'd suggested changing her attending physician to someone he was friendly with. He'd even questioned why she needed to be on a psychiatric hold at all. Every single action could be explained away as administrative oversight, but taken together, it painted a picture of someone who couldn't let go. Someone who was using his power and position to stay connected to a person who'd legally cut him out of her life. The media circus got worse before it got better. News vans parked outside the hospital. Reporters tried to interview staff members as they came and went. Rebecca stopped using the main entrance and started parking in the employee lot in the back. but the story had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just about one nurse and one director anymore. It had become something bigger. People were talking about abuse of power in healthcare, about how domestic violence victims aren't safe even in hospitals, about how nurses are often the last line of defense for vulnerable patients. Rebecca's phone kept ringing. Interview requests. People wanting her to tell her story. She ignored all of them. This wasn't about becoming famous. It was about doing her job. On the fourth day, something unexpected happened. Rebecca was called back to the boardroom, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Mr. Richardson was there, along with 2 other board members and the hospital's chief medical officer. Please, sit down, Mr. Richardson said, and he actually smiled. First, I want to apologize for everything you've been through, for doubting you, even for a second, for putting you in a position where you felt you had to defend yourself for doing the right thing. Rebecca didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. The investigation has concluded, he continued. Director Chen violated hospital policy, patient privacy laws, and the terms of a legal restraining order. His employment has been terminated effective immediately. He'll also be facing criminal charges for stalking and HIPAA violations. How's the patient? Rebecca asked. That's what she really wanted to know. The chief medical officer, Dr. Anderson, answered. She's doing better. We moved her to a private facility where she'll be more comfortable and can focus on her recovery. She's aware of what happened. She wanted me to tell you thank you. Rebecca felt her throat tighten. I was just doing my job. That's what makes it so important, Dr. Anderson said. You didn't think about the politics or the consequences. You just protected your patient. That's what nursing is supposed to be. Mr. Richardson cleared his throat. We'd like to offer you a promotion, nurse manager for the ICU. It comes with a significant raise and a seat on the hospital's patient safety committee. We need people like you in leadership positions. Rebecca sat back in her chair, stunned. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Patricia's voice came from the doorway. She was standing there with Tom and about a dozen other nurses, all grinning. We already know you're going to say yes. How did you all? Rebecca started. We've been waiting outside for an hour, Tom said. We figured they were either firing you or promoting you, and we wanted to be here either way. Though we're much happier it's the promotion, Patricia added. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Rebecca adjusted to her new role, which meant less time on the floor and more time in meetings. She missed direct patient care, but she realized she could make a bigger impact this way. She could change policies. She could advocate for better staffing. She could make sure nurses had a voice in decisions that affected patient care. The patient from room 412, whose name Rebecca learned was Lisa, sent her a letter. It was short but powerful. Dear Rebecca, I don't know if you understand what you did for me. When I was admitted to that hospital, I thought I'd finally found a place where I could be safe, where he couldn't reach me. When I found out later that he'd tried to get to me, and that you stopped him, it meant everything. You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything, but you protected me anyway. You gave me back something I'd lost, the feeling that someone was on my side. Thank you. I'm getting better now. I'm rebuilding my life, and part of that is because of you. Rebecca kept that letter in her desk drawer. On hard days when hospital politics got frustrating or she questioned whether she'd made the right choice taking the promotion, she'd read it again. The hospital made changes too. They implemented new safeguards for patient privacy. Administrators no longer had blanket access to medical records. There were now checks and balances, audit trails that got reviewed regularly. They created a patient advocate position specifically for vulnerable patients, but perhaps the most important change was cultural. Staff members felt empowered to speak up, to question things that didn't feel right, to put patients first even when it was inconvenient or politically complicated. David's case went to court. Rebecca had to testify, which was nerve-wracking but necessary. She told the truth about what happened that night, about the restraining order, about his attempt to access a protected patient. The judge was not sympathetic. David was convicted of stalking, harassment, and multiple HIPAA violations. He lost his medical license. He lost his career. His face was all over the news as an example of how power can be abused. Rebecca tried not to think about him too much. She focused instead on Lisa, who was thriving in her recovery, on the changes at the hospital, on the new nurses she was training who looked at her with respect and admiration. "How did you know what to do?" one young nurse asked her.
"How did you have the courage to stand up to the director?"
Rebecca thought about it. "I didn't feel courageous in the moment," she admitted. "I felt terrified. But I knew one thing for certain. My job is to protect my patients. Not sometimes. Not when it's convenient. Always. And once you're clear about that, the decision becomes simple. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about being a nurse. And sometimes being a nurse means standing in a doorway and refusing to move, even when the most powerful person in the building is trying to get past you. Even when you might lose your job. Even when you're scared. Because on the other side of that doorway is someone who can't protect themselves. Someone who's counting on you to do it for them. That's the job. And Rebecca Williams had never been more proud to do it. 6 months later, Rebecca stood in the same ICU where everything had changed, but she was seeing it through different eyes now. As nurse manager, she'd spent the morning reviewing staffing schedules and attending a budget meeting. It was strange how much her life had shifted in such a short time. The hospital was different too. It felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. The new director, Dr. Patel, actually listened when staff members raised concerns. She walked the floors regularly, not with a clipboard looking for problems, but genuinely checking in with people. Morale had improved so much that they'd actually had nurses from other hospitals applying to work at Riverside. "Rebecca?" Patricia poked her head into the office. "There's someone here to see you." "She says it's important." Rebecca looked up from her computer. "Did she give a name?" Patricia smiled mysteriously. "She said you'd know who she is." Curious, Rebecca made her way to the small conference room they used for private meetings. When she opened the door, she froze. Lisa was sitting there looking nothing like the broken woman who'd been in room 412 6 months ago. She was dressed in business casual, her hair styled, her eyes clear and bright. She stood up when Rebecca entered, and there was a moment of awkward silence. Then Lisa smiled. "Hi, I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." "Of course I remember you," Rebecca said softly. She gestured to the chairs. "Please sit." "How are you?" "I'm good," Lisa said, and she sounded like she meant it. "Really good, actually. I've been in therapy. I got my own apartment. I started a new job last month. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm actually living instead of just surviving." Rebecca felt her eyes getting watery. "That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you." "I couldn't have done it without you," Lisa said. "I know I sent you that letter, but I needed to tell you in person. What you did that night when you stood up to him, it changed everything for me." "I was just doing my job," Rebecca said, which is what she always said when people brought it up. "No," Lisa said firmly. "You did more than your job. You saw me as a person worth protecting. Do you know how rare that is? How many people knew about the restraining order and did nothing? How many people saw the warning signs and looked the other way?" Rebecca thought about David accessing Lisa's records 17 times. About the other hospital staff who must have seen those access logs and said nothing. About a system that had failed to protect a vulnerable person until it was almost too late. "I'm just glad you're safe now," Rebecca said. "I wanted you to know that I'm not just surviving anymore," Lisa continued. "I'm actually thriving. I've started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, helping other women who are going through what I went through, and I tell them all about the nurse who stood in a doorway and refused to let my abuser near me. You've inspired more people than you know." They talked for another hour. Lisa told her about her recovery journey, about the setbacks and the breakthroughs, about how she'd learned to trust again, about the support groups and therapy sessions that had helped her rebuild her sense of self. Before she left, Lisa hugged Rebecca tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for protecting me, for giving me a chance to become who I'm meant to be." After Lisa left, Rebecca sat alone in the conference room for a while, letting herself feel the weight of what had happened. She'd changed someone's life. Not by doing something extraordinary, but by simply doing what was right. That afternoon, Rebecca had to teach a training session for new nurses. It was part of her responsibilities as nurse manager, something she'd grown to love. These young nurses, fresh out of school, full of idealism and energy, reminded her why she'd fallen in love with nursing in the first place. "Today we're talking about patient advocacy," Rebecca said as the group settled into their seats. About 15 young faces looked back at her, notebooks ready. "Can anyone tell me what that means?" A young woman in the front row raised her hand. It means speaking up for patients who can't speak for themselves. That's part of it, Rebecca agreed. But it's more than that. Patient advocacy means putting your patient's needs above everything else, above hospital politics, above your own comfort, above your relationship with your supervisors. It means being willing to make hard choices and face difficult consequences to do what's right. She told them a story then, not her story exactly, but close enough, about a nurse who had to stand up to someone powerful to protect a vulnerable patient, about how scary it was, about how she almost lost her job, but about how in the end she'd sleep at night knowing she'd done the right thing. You're going to face moments in your career where you have to choose, Rebecca said, between what's easy and what's right. Between going along to get along and standing firm on your principles. Those moments will define who you are as a nurse. One of the young men raised his hand. But what if we're wrong? What if we stand up for something and it turns out we made a mistake? Then you apologize and learn from it, Rebecca said simply. But I'll tell you something I've learned. It's better to err on the side of protecting your patient. You can recover from being overly cautious. You can't recover from failing to protect someone who needed you. After the training, several of the new nurses came up to thank her. One young woman lingered after the others left. Was that story about you? She asked quietly. The one about standing up to someone powerful? Rebecca smiled. What makes you think that? I Googled you before I started working here, the nurse admitted. I saw the news articles about what happened with the former director. You're kind of famous, you know. I'm really not, Rebecca laughed. I'm just a nurse who did her job. That's what makes it so inspiring, the young woman said. You didn't do it for recognition or to become famous. You did it because it was right. That's the kind of nurse I want to be. That evening, Rebecca stayed late to finish some paperwork. The hospital was quiet, peaceful in the way it only got after visiting hours. She walked through the ICU, checking on patients even though it wasn't technically her job anymore. Old habits. She passed room 412. There was a different patient there now, an elderly man recovering from heart surgery. But for a moment, she remembered standing in that doorway. Remembered the fear and the adrenaline and the absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate your 6-month anniversary as manager? Tom's buying. Rebecca smiled and texted back a yes. As she gathered her things to leave, she thought about how much had changed. Not just for her, but for the whole hospital. They'd implemented new privacy protections. They'd created better systems for protecting vulnerable patients. They'd started a program where staff could anonymously report concerns about potential abuse or harassment. And it had all started because one nurse had stood in a doorway and said no. Rebecca didn't think of herself as a hero. Heroes were people who did extraordinary things. She'd just done her job, but maybe that was the point. Maybe being a hero wasn't about doing something nobody else could do. Maybe it was about doing what anyone should do, but having the courage to actually do it. She locked her office and headed toward the exit. Tomorrow there would be more meetings, more decisions, more challenges. But tonight she'd go home knowing that she'd made a difference. That somewhere out there, Lisa was living her life free from fear. That new nurses were learning that patient care meant more than just medical treatment. That a hospital had changed its culture because someone had dared to stand up. As Rebecca pushed through the hospital doors into the cool evening air, she thought about all the nurses who came before her. The ones who'd advocated for their patients when nobody else would. The ones who'd stood up to authority when it was dangerous to do so. The ones who'd put their careers on the line for people they barely knew. She was part of that legacy now. And she'd spend the rest of her career making sure that legacy continued, because that's what nurses do. They protect. They advocate. They stand in doorways when they need to.